We know the Boston Marathon. It's the premier marathon in America. And this past year, 6 months ago now, and 6 months until the next one, this past year in April, it got to be more in the forefront of our understanding because of the bombings that occurred. 2 bombs going off within just moments of each other near the finish line and overshadowing immensely the race itself. This last Sunday, the Chicago Marathon happened. You may not have paid as much attention because nobody bombed anything. But the Chicago Marathon had a story this last Sunday that filled my life this week. It's the story of Leanne Yanni. She ran in the Chicago Marathon. She'd run marathons before. She completed the marathon in 5 hours and 45 minutes. It was a personal worst. And it was the best marathon she had ever run. For you see, 6 months ago, she was near the finish line at the Boston Marathon waiting for friends when the bomb went off. It shattered her left leg. She said, this is a tad gruesome, spoiler alert. She looked down and saw the bone poking through the flesh. It had destroyed the tibia and the fibula. They had to be rebuilt. They were shattered. She had to have skin grafts, multiple surgeries. She had to learn to walk again. She spent a lot of time in a swimming pool because you're more buoyant walking in a swimming pool, learning to walk again. But by the time of the Boston Marathon last April, she had already registered to run in the Chicago Marathon last week. And she said, I'm going to run the Chicago Marathon. An audacious goal. A bodacious goal, a crazy goal. You can't run a marathon 6 months after your leg's been totally destroyed. But she did. She completed the Chicago Marathon in her personal worst time and her personal best race. She had a crazy, crazy goal. And she led me to thinking about the 150th birthday of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You see, we've got our birthday balloons up, don't you? We're going to spend, this is the 150th birthday this year of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we're going to spend 4 of the next 6 weeks kind of doing a birthday celebration. I thought about Happy Birthday as an opening hymn, but I figured maybe that wasn't our best plan. But somewhere in here, we're going to sing Happy Birthday. We're just going to do that. But I thought of Leanne Yanni thinking about our 150th anniversary because the Seventh-day Adventist Church began with incredible audacity. See, this was probably the finest Seventh-day Adventist church about the time we organized as a denomination. Do you see that beautiful little church up there? No, you don't. It was a crummy little church. But it was better than the open-air tent meetings we had had as a group of believers before that. I mean, if you live in Michigan, a tent is not a place you want to go to church in January. And if you live in upstate New York, it's not. Actually, if you live in Maryland, a tent isn't a great place to go to church in January. There were 3,500 believers, they called themselves, who became members of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination in 1863. 3,500 members of that church that had this unbelievably audacious, bodacious goal. Reach the entire world with the message that Jesus is coming again and He loves you. 3,500 people are going to do that? Wow. Talk about, are you familiar with management literature, the BHAGs? A BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. A BHAG, this is a BHAG. And now we are 150 years later. How are we doing? Well, there are 17 million Seventh-day Adventists around the world, but that doesn't count everybody who's part of our faith community. If you look at everybody who's part of the Adventist church, attending but not yet a member, you may fit in that category. A child of the members' families. If you are attending, being part of the church without being a member, if we counted everybody in that broader circle, it's probably more like 25 million people. And our goal was to reach the entire world. We're active in more than 200 countries around the world. And I say 200 plus because the number changes often enough. I don't want to stick one there. There are about 230 to 35 countries recognized by the United Nations. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has an active presence in most of them, in more than 200 of them. Some of those we don't have an active presence in are Andorra. You've probably never even heard of Andorra. It's a country about the size of this sanctuary. Well, no, it's a little bigger than that. But it's not a whole lot bigger than Beltsville. It's not as big as Prince George's County, on the border, up in the mountains between France and Spain. There aren't a lot of places on earth where we can go that we haven't gone as a church to tell people Jesus is coming again. It's who we are as a denomination. And we express that in a lot of different ways. We have development programs in almost 200 countries of the world, helping to develop the capabilities of people there. Disaster relief response in every corner of the globe. We run church schools. We run an education system that stretches all around the globe in country after country. Medical work in country after country. You know I'm invested in that. Our son and daughter-in-law are headed back to Chad this Tuesday. They are operating a 70-bed hospital in Chad that routinely has more than 70 people there. It's the busiest surgical hospital in the country of Chad, and it's out in the boondocks. It's not in the main capital. Seventh-day Adventists go places to do things that are just unique in Christianity in all of the world. In many ways, this audacious, bodacious goal, we can say, is reached. Except Jesus hasn't come back yet. And we still have things to do. So let's say it is being reached, not accomplished. Through these next few weeks, we're going to look at 150 years of Seventh-day Adventist church history. But because we are we're a unique church, we have a commitment to belief that's deep and strong. And so as we look at our history, I want to look at how we develop these doctrines. What is it that made our beliefs so strong in our lives that we will follow it wherever it may lead? And this week we start by looking at the second coming. And we start with the story of William Miller. The children's story today was the story of William Miller, a lieutenant in the army in the War of 1812, and a deist by nature. Deists, if you don't know what that means, a deist is a person who believes God created the world, set everything in motion, and then said, "Hope you have a good time," and walked away to do something else. Deists did not believe God was particularly involved in the life of this world. William Miller was in the army, and he saw a lot of people dying. And he wondered what happens when you die. And he saw cruelty and difficulty and began wondering about whether there was a God who cared about what happened on this earth, and began challenging his deist ideas. And then he began looking around at the various Christian churches. And this Christian church believed one thing and criticized that Christian church for believing something different. This Christian church believed something different and criticized that church for not believing what they did. Not much has changed in 200 years, has it? And there'd be a third Christian church criticizing both of them, and a fourth Christian church, and a fifth Christian church, all of which believe different things. Now, I want to point out that some of that is because Christians believe what they believe with a passion. And sometimes that passion turns into criticism. Let's let that passion turn into love. But William Miller had a different approach to this. William Miller said, I don't want to know what the churches teach. I want to know what the Bible has to say. And he started our church, this Seventh-day Adventist denomination, celebrating our 150th birthday. He started our church with the idea we're going to look at what the Bible has to say, and what people have to say won't matter as much as what the Bible has to say. And he sat down at the study in his home with two books. One of them was a Bible, and the other was a concordance. Now, you may not be familiar with what a concordance is. A concordance has in it every word that's in the Bible in alphabetical order. So when the Bible starts out in the beginning, the third word in the Bible, would be quite a ways into the concordance. But when the Bible says Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, Alpha is going to be right up near the front of the concordance. Every word in the Bible in alphabetical order. Now, I even have a concordance at home that lists the word the. I mean, this book is about that thick. But the idea is you can study what the Bible may say in Genesis and what the Bible may say in Malachi, and find words that are the same and say, now, this Bible writer said this Bible writer said this, what does it mean? And that is how William Miller decided to study. Concordances also, good concordances, have the Hebrew and Greek, the original words that were written there. And so William Miller was studying, and he said, I purpose to study nothing but the Bible, to know what the Bible has to say, because the Christian denominations were so much at argument with each other. Well, in his study of the Bible, he gets down to the book of Daniel. This study, incidentally, goes on for several years. And he gets down to the book of Daniel. And he runs across Daniel 2, and he sees this image described in Daniel 2. An image that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he couldn't remember the dream. And he was ready to kill a whole lot of people when Daniel said, give me a little while. And Daniel prays, and God gives him a vision of what that dream was and tells him the interpretation. And there's a head of gold, and then the breastplate and the chest is silver, and the belly and the thighs are brass, and the legs are iron, and the feet are iron and clay. Oh, what an amazing thing. William Miller looks at that and says, this is the sweep of Western history. Wow, amazing that God could reveal to Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel hundreds of years before Jesus was born, thousands of years before William Miller is living, the sweep of human history. And then he goes on and he reads more in Daniel. He gets to Daniel 7, and he sees 4 things again, but this time they are animals. There's a lion, there's a bear, there's a leopard, and then there's an animal he cannot describe. And as William Miller is reading it, he goes, wow, those 4 animals are like the 4 parts of that image. This is amazing. God must think this is important. It's happening twice in the Bible. And then he goes and reads on, and in the very next chapter, he comes to Daniel 8, and he sees a ram and a he-goat. There's only 2 animals this time, and neither one of them is quite so fearsome, except the he-goat whacks the ram. And an angel comes and explains it to Daniel. He says, Daniel, the ram is Medo-Persia, the kingdom that you are living in, and the he-goat is the next kingdom to come after this that will destroy Medo-Persia. And Daniel sees, I'm being given insights about this. And William Miller says, this is fascinating. He reads on one more chapter. He gets to Daniel 9, and this time there's only one beast, and it has kind of consumed the others. There's a lion and a bear and some leopards, but this nondescript beast, there's a tremendous focus about this. And William Miller realizes that in Daniel 2, this image is destroyed when a stone is cut out of the mountain and comes and hits it. And then in Daniel 7, the 4 beasts, there's an ending to that, but there's a little more discussion of the ending. And then in Daniel 8, a little more discussion yet of the ending. And in Daniel 9, more about the end and judgment time. And Daniel comes to realize these prophecies, these things in Daniel, all come to a conclusion at the end of the world. I'm reading about the end of the world. And then he goes back to Daniel 8. Oh, excuse me. I forgot. He decided to simplify everything he was learning. Isn't that simple? You understand that, don't you? Oh, man. But Daniel goes back and reads just a bit more in Daniel 8. Excuse me, William Miller does. And he finds this verse, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And by this time, Daniel has come to, William Miller has come to understand that in prophecy, a day is a way of representing a year. So he says, I got 2,300 years here. And he looks at this and he says, the sanctuary being cleansed, well, that would mean that sin is gotten rid of on this earth. That's referring to Jesus coming again and cleansing the earth of sin, making it new. See, William Miller has been using his Bible. He's been using his concordance. He's been looking up where it says days. In other places it says days and years equal each other. He's been looking up sanctuary and cleansed, and he's been finding that it's a symbol of having the end of all things sinful and a cleansing of sin out of things. And he is convinced that at the end of 2,300 years, Jesus will come. But he doesn't know when the 2,300 years will start. If you know that it's 500 miles to your destination, you just don't know when the 500 miles starts, you don't know how far you are away. And so Daniel went ahead and William Miller went ahead and he looked to Daniel 9. And he realized that in Daniel 9 there was another prophecy about 70 weeks, 490 days or 490 years. And those weeks are cut off. And he began to realize those weeks would be cut off from the 2,300 days. So he said, man, if I could figure out when this starts, I'd know when the other starts. And then he looked more carefully, and it says, from the decree to restore and build Jerusalem. And William Miller realizes, that's a date I can figure out. I know when that date is. It's 457 BC. If I go 2,300 years from that date, I'll get to when Jesus is going to come. And it's 1843 or 1844. Now, do you remember when William Miller started studying his Bible? It was when he got done with the War of 1812. And he comes to this conclusion along about 1818. Jesus will return in about 1843 or 1844. Wow. It's 25 years away. What would you do if you knew Jesus was coming in 25 years? I will tell you what William Miller did. He went back to study his prophecies some more. He looked again at that image in Daniel 2. He looked again at those beasts in Daniel 7. He looked again at his chart. He added up his calculations again. He refocused everything because, you see, William Miller is afraid he might be wrong, so he studies some more. And in the process of that, he spends another 13 years. He's got 25 years. He spends more than half of it making sure he's right. Because, see, William Miller thought the second coming was all about calculations. William Miller thought the second coming was all about getting prophecy interpretation right. William Miller thought the second coming was all about knowing the signs, finding out if this earthquake would be a fulfillment of that, if this dark day would be a fulfillment of the other. If all of these things would add up, then he'd be right. And in those 13 years, something else happened to William Miller. He records for us, the scriptures became my delight, and in Jesus I found a friend. Do you see the huge difference here? Do you see the difference happening in William Miller's life? Jesus becomes his focus. You see, instead of, this is a wonderful mental exercise to figure out when Jesus will come, it becomes, this is a friend I'd like to get to know better. And he's going to be here. Do you see the difference that happens? William Miller was deathly afraid to preach because he might be wrong. Now he's deathly afraid to preach because he might miss out on the joy he can have with Jesus. When Jesus enters into this equation, William Miller changes. And when Jesus enters into our lives, things change. Have you ever had an experience where someone asked a question and you knew the biblical answer to it, but you were afraid you might be wrong, and you didn't want to speak out? I want to encourage you to do what William Miller did. Read the scriptures and find in them a friend named Jesus. For that is what makes the difference in William Miller's life. See, suddenly Daniel 9 changes. And now William Miller is ready to preach. Kind of. He still doesn't like to preach. He's still worried that he might be wrong. But now he knows that Jesus is this friend who's coming back, and he wants to tell other people about it. So he gets down in that study, that place where he's reading with his Bible and his concordance. He kneels down there and he prays, Lord, if you want me to tell somebody, I am willing, but you will have to bring a person to my door who asks me to come and preach at their church. You don't ever want to make that kind of a deal with God if you aren't ready to follow through. Because William Miller was interrupted in his praying. He didn't get to amen before there's a knock on the door. And it's his nephew. And his nephew said, a couple of hours ago, my dad told me I needed to come over here and ask you if you would come to our church and preach this Sunday. Don't ever make a deal with God if you don't want to keep your share. I remember one day, I was skiing, and it was a gorgeous, glorious day. And I was going to be skiing alone. And there was about 12 inches of fresh powder. Oh, it was great. I was skiing alone, which means you can go into this little line called singles, and you get up closer to the front and you just find somebody who else is single, and you ride the chairlift together. And I said, God, this is such a glorious day. I will put in a good word for you with the people I'm riding with in the chairlift if you have them start the conversation. I got in the singles line, I got on the chairlift, first trip up the mountain. And the guy beside me says, man, this day is so gorgeous I could almost believe in God. It's like God said, how long would you like to wait until I answer your prayer? I'm feeling so good. I mean, have you had those experiences where you feel this connection with God? He's in your life. He's working through your life. You got it. You know it. And I get off the chairlift. I say goodbye. We've had our little time talking about God, saying my good word for God. I ski down through fresh, unbroken powder. Oh, it was gorgeous. I get down to the bottom. I'm saying, Lord, thank you for answering my prayer. I get in my singles line. I get on next to somebody. The person beside me says, this is just a beautiful day. I think God gave me a special gift. I said, Lord, I thought I'd gotten the answer to this prayer. Every trip up the chairlift that day, somebody else beside me started the conversation about spiritual things. Don't pray, I'd like to do this, Lord, but I'll only do it if you do that, because God will bring it to pass. You want to be ready when you say, Lord, let this be in my life, because God will bring it to your life. William Miller starts preaching. But William Miller preaches in towns you've never heard mentioned. A lot of them don't exist anymore. This is 170 years ago. This is 1831. I guess that's more like 180 years ago. It's a long time back. And for 8 years, from 1818 to 1831, William Miller preaches to nobody. From 1831 to 1839, 8 years, William Miller preaches in little bitty podunk towns, never to more than maybe 50, 70 people, lots of times to 5 or 10 people. There is a world to be warned, and William Miller just isn't doing too much. But in 1839, he gets an invitation to come preach at Joshua V. Himes Church in Boston. And Joshua V. Himes is a great promoter, and he hears Miller. He is convinced, and across the next 4 or 5 years, William Miller's message gets voiced all over I say all over America. You realize nobody preached it in Nevada. That's because there weren't many people in Nevada. They preached it all the way out to the extreme western frontier in Ohio. They preached it all the way down south to about Maryland here. It didn't get much further south than this, maybe Virginia some. But across this territory, hundreds of thousands of people believed and looked for Jesus to come in just those last 5 years. See, when you fully commit yourself to God and say, I'll do what you want, I'll go where you want, I'll be who you want, God can take what seems impossible and make it happen. Audacious, bodacious goals are God's plan for our lives, our church, and our worldwide organization. That's how it happens. But it doesn't happen until we realize that who is coming matters. See, when the focus was all about learning about the coming, William Miller was reticent to step out. But when the focus became who is coming, William Miller found the courage to step out, do what was uncomfortable for him, but feel God's leading and presence in his life. And maybe that's what needs to happen for us as well. We need to see Jesus. We need to make certain he's focus and center and everything. That Jesus is everything we hope to do, hope to be, hope to talk about, hope to live for, everything. We need to find the way to say, oh, how I love Jesus. At our church here, it's almost 7 years I've been with you as pastor. We've had this kind of thought about we ought to do something with our community. It became more clear as we became more fixed on knowing what Jesus had to do. So we have a community center now that's helped upwards of 1,000 people in the year plus it's been opened. And I know some of you have said, wow, all I did was roll a paintbrush up and down a wall. You know what? That made it possible for someone to feel comfortable that they were in a good place when they came to our center. And now we love Jesus and we're saying, let's plant a church. You know, those are kind of audacious, bodacious thoughts that have infiltrated our church. We're going to plant a church and have a community center getting off the ground at the same time. That's not possible, except when God is in it. And that is why I love Jesus so much. He makes that which is audacious and bodacious into birthday parties. He gives us the fun of working with Him and of having the joy of sharing the good news, the very heart of what is Seventh-day Adventism. That Adventist in Seventh-day Adventist is Jesus is coming again soon.